Welcome to another awesome iMoot session, folks. We're joined by the absolutely fantastic Joyce Seitzinger, who is sharing 10 learner experience powers from Experience Girl. I can't wait for this session. Joyce, you are fantastic at this stuff, so please lead us away.
Hi everyone, kia ora to the people who are joining us from New Zealand. Still miss you, but I'm glad that Miranda just said that it's cold there as well. I'm in Melbourne. It's very cold over here as well. So yay, another iMoot. I can't believe it's been a year since last year's iMoot, which is when I first spoke about learner experience design, my very first kind of public outing about learner experience design, which at the time I did together with my friend Dr. Jess Knott, who's in Michigan State University. And since then, Jess and I have done a lot more work together, and we've done it independently of each other as well. Jess has turned her entire team into a learner experience design team. She's the manager of learning design at Michigan State University. And we have started to do learner experience design with several Australian universities. And we've also run some learner experience design workshops in New Zealand and soon here in Australia as well. So it's been a really exciting time. We've connected, and Jess and I have also connected in Austin, Texas, where we presented on South by Southwest at South by Southwest EDU, and I suppose that that if there's any kind of power, and I really love the theme of this year's iMoot, by the way. I think Agents of Change was absolutely brilliant, and I know that that my Experience Girl doesn't do justice to some of the fabulous imagery that all of the other people have been putting together. But I would say that if there's one kind of overarching power that I've seen with Experience Girl, or for really any person who's doing experience, it's that it's highly contagious. So basically, when you start exerting your experience powers, there are a lot more people who then start using experience design in their work as well. So be warned, once you get into experience design, it's highly contagious. Really looking forward to, I thought that for today, since we've got since the sessions are a little bit shorter, I thought what I would do is just set up a little bit about experience design. I've got a lot more slides than I know I'll be able to get through, and then just set out like 10 easy things that people can start to do straight away in their learning design work. So whether you're an educator, a learning designer, or a librarian, you can start using these things almost straight away. And feel free to drop any kind of questions in the chat. You know how it is, it always gets a little bit distracting. And so I might not be able to see it all, but Lindy is here with us, and I know that Teresa's here as well, so I'm sure there'll be a few of you who will be kind of monitoring that stream and perhaps can remind me when I actually miss out on something. Okay, so who am I? Well, these days I do call myself a learner experience designer. I'm a learning designer with about 17 years experience since 1999, and I've worked in corporate and I've worked in universities. And in New Zealand, I worked at a polytechnic in the Hawke's Bay. But being Experience Girl, or being a learning experience designer, is really like a recent alter ego. It's only about 2 years ago that I started to 2.5 years ago that I started to explore user experience mainly at the time, and that I started to see just all of the possibilities and all of the things that we could learn from the way that people design for complex digital environments. And that there was a lot there that we could actually bring back into our work. So if you want to kind of tweet about the session as I'm talking as well, and I've also tweeted the link to the slides. You can follow me at Cat's Pajamas NZ, and of course use the hashtags iMoot16 and LXDesign. So what is learner experience design? Well, to me, it really comes from this idea of experience design, and then focusing specifically on the processes that a learner goes through and the experiences that a learner has. And it's really about creating an experience that transcends the material that you're using to facilitate the experience. So if you're thinking, for instance, about like a phone, which we all have, what we do with this and the experiences that we have with this doesn't come about because we have an electronically powered piece of glass, right? Everything that we experience through this, the connections that we make with other people through it, the laughs we have when we see a funny gift, those are things that transcend the material that we're actually accessing it through. And so I suppose in a way that's a good way of thinking about what we do when we design for learning experience as well, which is that we want to transcend the tools and the environments that we use in order to actually make that experience happen or to facilitate that experience. And if you want a different way of thinking about it, this is the LX pyramid, which actually comes from a customer experience pyramid, which was developed. But basically what you want to try to do is to move up that pyramid. So you want to, if you look at kind of the basic layer that is being really functional, and that means that it works but with inconvenience, then you go through a reliable phase, a usable phase, but it's actually quite difficult to come across the convenient layer to where, you know, the tools and environments that we set up are easy to use and they work as expected. And so this is something that I think that we can strive for. And this is not just about the LMS, but it's actually about the entire learning experience. So including how easy it is to get onto campus, how easy it is to get into classrooms, you know, just how easy it is to have a meaningful learning experience. So it builds a little bit, and you know, we're exploring this, and there are several people in the United States who are exploring this as well. But the learner experience design, and in fact now we have people in New Zealand exploring it as well, with Miranda and Miriam working on it, which is awesome. And Perrin, who's not here, but Perrin has been Perrin Rowland. She's been working on this as well. So some of the design disciplines that I draw on when I think about learner experience design and what it could be is user experience design, and these are two names that will be familiar to you, Don Norman and Jacob Nielsen. And really, what they want to achieve is high quality user experience in a companies' offerings, I would say organizations' offerings. There should be a seamless merging of the services of multiple disciplines. And of course, that you could see how applicable that is to any kind of corporate environment that's trying to design learning experiences, but also to educational institutions. I'm very keen on not focusing so much on just the user, but actually on designing for the experience. And there's this great book by Mark Hassenthal, in fact, my first quote was from him as well, which is about what experience design is and where experience comes from. And so by not focusing so much on the experience, actually, I'll go on to my, I'll come back to that in just a second. We can borrow from human-centered design. There's some great work that's being done, and you'll find that as you start reading about this, that there's actually quite a bit of overlap between all of these different kind of design disciplines. But the thing that I like about this quote by Don Norman is that he says that that basically when we design these experiences, it shouldn't mean that we must live in continual frustration. And certainly whenever we do any kind of work where we actually go and hear from the learners, and we even, you know, you'll find this when you speak to maybe some of your subject matter experts, maybe some of the academics that you work with, everyone is so frustrated with the systems that we use. You know, why do I have to click so many times? Why do I have to do so many things? So anything that we can do kind of to alleviate that frustration, I think helps us move up that pyramid. And here with service design, which is another design discipline that I think we can be looking at, this is really key for me, and one of the reasons that I'd be quite keen on not focusing so much on the user always, which is that when we design experiences, there's actually different stakeholders in that. So we want it to be good for the learner, and that is the person whose experience counts the most. But at the same time, we have to be aware of the fact that there are different parts of the organization and different people who are going to be instrumental in delivering those products / services. And service design is very much about mapping what the experience should be for the final user, but also looking at how we can design it so that it's also convenient for the organization and the individual actors in that organization to actually deliver that. So I think there might be more parallels for us with service design thinking than there are with something like user experience. But then when you look at the level of maybe an app that we design for students to use, then obviously there is a lot that we could be that we would be doing from the user experience perspective. So that's why I'm saying, it's not, you can't really just say like there's a one-on-one comparison. We kind of have to design it for ourselves. But what's common to all of these things is that they have their own methodologies and processes that they follow. And the other thing that they all have in common is that they really start from a place of empathy for the user. And Mark Hassensahl from the Experience Design book has this to say about empathy for the user, that feelings are integral to experiences, maybe even at its core, and inextricably intertwined with our action. But the one that I really like is this one by Indy Young, and she's a user experience designer. She's very active on Twitter, so you can go find her and follow her work. She's written several books about user experience design. One of them is on empathy, and in which she says that empathy is a noun and it's a thing and it's an understanding that you develop about another person. But empathizing is the use of that understanding and action, and also some really interesting things that she has in her book about the difference between empathy and sympathy. So, so she's definitely someone that you should be looking into. So do we actually need learner experience design? Haven't we already got processes like this? Well, I'm not the only one who's kind of exploring this space, and in fact, in the literature, there's been quite a few calls for us to get more rigorous about how we do the learning design that we do. So this was by Eileen in a paper by Eileen Scanlon from 2013, in which she called for educational technologists to develop a set of principled working practices that contribute to a design science for education. And Diana Laurillard, who you all know from the conversational framework theory, in her book, Teaching as a Design Science, also calls for us to start really looking at what we can do in educational innovation and really having some principles of design behind good teaching and learning. So I think that's, and there's actually another person here in Australia, in Sydney, Dr. Peter Goodyear, Professor Peter Goodyear, who's been calling for people to take up design and think more about how we design learning experience as well. One of the issues that I have with all of these people who are calling for this is that quite often the work of the design, they actually say, oh, if only we can get teachers to take on design thinking or start learning about design, then we'll get better outcomes. And I actually disagree with that, because I think that in order to do this design really well, we can't put it on the shoulders of people who are already overloaded and who are always being asked to adopt more practices. And I think in order to get good design done, we actually need to have teams that work on designing and developing the learning experiences and the products and services that are needed for that. So it's something that I'm exploring with my friend Jess, who's at Michigan State, particularly because looking at how she and her team, her learning design team, are trying to facilitate more of this kind of this team-based design processes, rather than saying, well, if only we train all of the lecturers in design, then everything will come right. And one of the interesting things about learning experiences and about any experiences is that experiences are always co-created. So it is basically created by the person who designs for the experience, and also then the actor, in our case, the learner, who actually comes in and engages with it. And so perhaps one of the best analogies here is the work that a writer does in writing a book, and then the work that you as a reader might do when you engage with that book. And you're going to have different experiences every single time that you engage with that book. The first time you will get different things away, you will take different things away from that book from when you read it for the first time at age 13 than from when you read it at age 50. So there is something about that experience that happens at the moment of creation and at the moment of design. And then there's also something that happens when somebody actually engages with that experience. So I think it's, you know, which brings me to this work that's been done at Ohio State University by Professor Liz Sanders, who talks about this idea that experiencing is inside people and you can't design it for someone else. So what you can do, however, is design for experiencing. And I think that is an important distinction. So we can't say, oh, we'll design this learning experience and everyone will have the same experience when they go through it. But what we can do is design for that participatory design and for the participatory experience. Okay, so with that, we'll get into a little bit of thinking, and for me to give you a few tools and techniques that you can start to use in your own work straight away. So because that's just a little bit of background and a little bit about my thinking about learner experience design. But what we've got here is the double diamond of design. Double diamond is a very common concept. If you've done any kind of design thinking, you'll be familiar with it. And if you, you might have seen it in other contexts as well. It basically sets out a process where you try not to immediately jump to a solution. So the idea is that you try to discover as much about your design challenge that you can in the discovery phase. And what you might find is that the larger design challenge that you have, say putting a course online, which is something that we're all familiar with, might actually have several sub-challenges inside it. So what you try to do is you try to find out as much as you can about the program, you try to find out as much as you can about the learners, about everybody else who's involved in that, and then you try to decide on what are the different sub-challenges that are in it. And by the time you get to the middle, what you should have is one specific challenge that you're trying to solve for. Now, once you get to that point, you go into the next stage of the double diamond, so you start to diverge again. So you've diverged and converged once. Now you start to diverge again because you start thinking about possible solutions to the challenge that you've identified. Again, you try to diverge as much as you can by trying to design as many different solutions as you can. Then you choose one and you start to refine that so that you have a final learner experience. So that's basically how the double diamond works, and I can talk a lot more about that, but I'm really key. And what you'll find is that the things that I'm going to share with you are kind of in that process and could be used, you know, kind of chronologically in that way as well. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to listen to your users, and that should definitely be a superpower for all of us. I used to think that I always knew exactly what was happening, but the fact is that I was always hearing about our users, our learners, secondhand, because most of the work that I would do would be based on me meeting with some of the teachers that I was co-designing with, and then saying, and then relying on them to tell me about what learners would do, wouldn't do, what learners, what devices learners had and what they didn't have, etc. And I never really, well, I used to not go out and actually verify that for myself and find the data and go talk to marketing and find out who is enrolling in this program, and you know, maybe even go back to last year's analytics and find out what the students in the previous iteration of the course did, etc. So I found that in adopting this as a practice, it can be incredibly powerful. It's just always amazing what it crops up and how it really challenges some of the assumptions that you have. So there's a lot of different techniques that are out there to do user research, but a really common one and one that can tell you a lot, and it requires a little bit of time investment, but you don't need to do a huge sample of learners, is to do user interviews. So you can create an interview guide for yourself. And one of the things that I've included here is to see if some meetings should be user interviews. because I found as I started to do this that some of the meetings that I used to have with my subject matter experts actually should have been a more formal interview. And I think that you could get several things out of that. One, it really emphasizes to people that you appreciate their time and that you're taking it seriously. I always try to record my interviews as well. You come with a whole set of questions. Don't share them beforehand because you really kind of want to hear their story in the moment. And that's actually the purpose of user interviews, is you want to get your users to tell you stories. Yeah, it really, I think it's something that when you're interviewing or when you're working with your subject matter expert, particularly in the beginning, it can be a really good process to go through, because I think it makes them realize as well that you don't think that you already know everything there is to know about their course, etc. So it creates that space, and it's also a way of actually developing that empathy with one of the stakeholders of the experience that you're designing for. You want to be an active listener during the interview. It really helps if you can have somebody else there, so that you can simply be talking and be engaging and really focusing on your interviewee, and somebody else will be doing the notes. Try to ask open questions, and one of the really great tips is to ask why and then ask it again, which is keep asking why until you get to the actual issue. And when things get a little bit quiet during an interview, give encouragement and ask people, how did you feel about that? What did you think? Can you tell me a little bit more about when that happened? And sometimes what you'll find is that silence is actually your best friend. On no amount of times have I just said to people, okay, well, that's the end of the interview. Is there anything else that you'd like to say? And then they'll say one thing, and then you're a little bit quiet. And then all of a sudden, this awesome gem comes out that just, puts a whole new spin on what they've been telling you before. So I find user interviews have been incredibly powerful in really helping, inform my thinking about a particular learning experience. One of the other things that you can do that's kind of similar is learner observation, where you actually ask them to do something. If you've got already an existing course, or maybe you've already produced some learning resources, you could actually just ask people to, hey, can you go through this? And as you do it, can you just talk aloud? In this case, the example that I've got here, we actually asked people to sketch out a front page of a program site. And we said, could you just, sketch out what you would like this program site to be? And it was really interesting because before that, we'd asked them to go to Blackboard and actually click through it and tell us, what they were doing and what they were trying to achieve. And because what we wanted to find out is what they wanted the program site to look like. And we were getting like tiny little improvements that they were asking for. Oh, it'd be nice if, we could have a banner image. Oh, it'd be nice if. But once we did this, they suddenly went to town and they just had lots of opinions about how they would want that front page to look and work. So sometimes having something that's almost like an analogy for what it is that you're actually trying to do can be more effective than actually getting them to work in the live environment. Another really great technique is that once you've done all of your user interviews and you've got a lot of insights, one of the things that you can do is do some empathy mapping. Really helps if you do this with the group that you're designing with. So even if one person went out and got all the interviews, what you'll have from that is all the insights. If you can map those out on little post-it notes, as you do here, and then set up an empathy map somewhere. An empathy map is typically a map that asks, what are our learners hearing? What are they thinking and feeling? What are they doing? And what are they seeing? And what you try to do is, from the interviews that you've done, is map that into those different quadrants and find out, what is it that they are experiencing? How are they feeling when they are doing this, when they are engaging with our learning experience? So this isn't a very difficult thing that you can do. If you wanted to run this with your team, basically once you've got your findings, ask everyone to just sit down on Post-its, capture the observations from the user interviews, but make sure that they actually do make sense when they stand on their own. So just one idea or observation per Post-it, but it has to actually tell you what the insight was. And then find an empathy mapping template. There are dozens and dozens of them online. Create an empty map on a large piece of paper, hang it up somewhere, and it'd be great if you can hang it up somewhere that that your team and the whole team that's involved in the design will have access to for a longer time, because it's great to be able to refer back to it and say, oh, but remember at the beginning when the students actually told us this? And then as a group, you just group your post-its on the quadrants in the map. With all of this, it's really about conversation. It's really about kind of like participatory thinking almost. So as you get your group to actually put up their insights, ask people to talk through it. And why do they think that some things go in one quadrant and some things go in another quadrant? Once you've got some of your data from different data sets and also from your user interviews and you've done some of your empathy mapping, it's time to actually make that information more usable for everyone on the team. And one of the things that you can do here is to start to create personas. In UX circles, some people are really fond of personas and will use them every single time. However, there's another technique that's called jobs to do, and that's really about describing what it is that people are trying to do. The two are very similar, or they have the same aim, but sometimes depending on the environment that you're working with and the people, you know, they might not care about the persona idea. They might think it's too touchy-feely, in which case you might take a look at the alternative jobs to be done. But basically what personas are they're almost like archetypes of your users. And it can be as simple as just a Word document that highlights different types of students that you might have. And so it's important from your interviews that you don't create 3 very similar persona. But for instance, if you find that some of your students are highly digitally literate and some of them are not that digitally literate, that you create one persona of each. If somebody has a lot of availability in time and somebody doesn't have that much time availability, that again, you split that across your personas so that you get well-rounded characters. Really helps to have a picture. It really helps to give that persona a name that is easily referenced. So in this case, what you see here is Anxious Emma. And it really helps to have like one quote that just describes and just captures the main frustration that that person has. Other common examples or common elements of a persona is to have the goals for that persona, to have a little bit about their experience, and also some of their pain points that they experience. Once again, there are so many examples out on the internet about persona and what kind of things you might want to include, and also about how you can present them. I would say, you know, find a template that works for you and then keep using it time and again. However, these attributes that you see up here should change every single time because it'll be different with every single cohort that you work with. In some, programs that you might be working on, it might be important that students have, different mathematical skills or that they have different English language skills, etc. So you want to make sure that the attributes that you identify actually are generated by the data that you collected earlier. Okay. One of the other superpowers that that you can kind of start, or that you've probably already exercised as a learning designer, but that is definitely part of experience design, is that you want to be able to facilitate group inputs. And there's a great book called Game Storming by David Gray. And in it, he's just got tons and tons of different kinds of games that you can use in order to facilitate meetings. And for different purposes, etc. But a very common technique that is used in user experience design is one called affinity diagramming, and it's basically a really easy way of, it can be used at lots of different moments and it can be used for lots of different purposes. But it's a way of ensuring that all of the voices in the group are heard. You can use it for brainstorming as well. You can use it to gather interview data. really any type of things. And it's kind of similar to what we were talking about earlier with the empathy map, which is that you want people to write down issues, ideas, problems, or issues on Post-its. Then you get people to do like one idea per Post-it, 5 to 7 words per Post-it, write big. But then what you would do is you would actually get people to go around the entire group, ask people to put up, their most important insight, and put that one up and talk about it as they do it. And then go around again until all of the ideas are up on the wall, or until there are too many repetitions. And then the idea is to, once you start to get it all up on the wall, and this was a session that we did, which I was actually based on our interview findings, is that after a while you will see that there are themes that are emerging from that affinity diagramming, and that you can start to map things. If you're, for instance, using this to decide on a problem that you're going to work on, or a challenge that everybody would like to take on, then what you can do is you can actually start to map the similar ones and group them together. And then what you would do is, after the affinity diagramming is over and you've got everything on the wall and grouped, you would give everyone a little sticker, just a little round sticker or a star or whatever, give everyone about 5, and say, look, you all get 5 votes. So vote on the one that appeals to you most, that you would like to work on. If you want to add all of your 5 stars to one thing, then that's great. And if you only want to, but if you want to spread your vote, you can do that as well. So it's just a great way of actually facilitating the group process and making sure that everyone is heard, and then also coming to some kind of consensus without just, sitting in endless meetings, etc. All right, one of the other things that you can do is you can help people to articulate a problem statement. Sometimes everyone thinks that they're working on the same problem, but they're not. And so one of the things that you can do quite early on in the design process is actually help your group and the team that you're designing with to define what the problem actually is. And a typical format for problem statements, although again, there are many formats, but a typical format for a problem statement would be something like this. So if this was our student, anxious Emma, it would go something like this. I am anxious Emma. I am a mother, a working mother with 2 children. I work in a part-time job, and I'm trying to study. So I'm trying to study online, but I can't always access my course because Blackboard has problems with always rendering properly in my browser. This makes me feel frustrated. That would be a typical one. That's a difficult one for us to solve. But another one could be, I am trying to participate in a group project, but I'm having a hard time finding times to meet with my group because my groups are a bunch of slackers. This makes me feel frustrated. So there are different ways that you can actually look at these problem statements and then try to solve for them. But actually articulating it can be really, really helpful, because then you know that everybody who's on the design team is actually trying to solve the same problem. One of the other superpowers you've got is to ask, how might we? How might we statements, again, this is very popular in design thinking. So if you've done any of the design thinking work, you'll recognize this. But how might we statements come after you've kind of got a problem statement. So once you've got your problem statement all sorted out, what you want to do is you want to break it into smaller actionable pieces. So with the group project problem, for instance, there are lots of different things that you could do. You could set up better meeting times. You could allocate the groups differently. There are a lot of different ways that you could actually go about solving for that problem. So in order to not immediately jump to a solution, this is where how might we questions come in. So how might we questions can be slanted in various different ways. Now, if you want more information about this, you can go to the Stanford D-School website. They share all of their workshop resources for free. So if you're interested in running this with a project, if you're at a point in a design project where you could do with a little bit of inspiration or getting the group a little bit revitalized, not just going for the easiest solution or the most obvious, then go to the Stanford D School and download some of their workshop resources. They're really good. So with how might we questions, there are different ways that you can actually start to generate different ways of thinking about the problem. In the example here, this is about, for instance, a mother of 3 rushing through the airport only to wait hours at the gates, and she needs to entertain her children because, annoying little brats irritate other passengers that are already frustrated. So how could you go about that? How might we, amp up the good? How might we use the kids' energy to entertain fellow passengers? How might we explore the opposite? How might we make the waiting the most exciting part of the trip? How might we identify unexpected resources? For instance, leverage the free time of fellow passengers in order to share the load of entertaining children, etc. So how might we statements are just a really good way of trying to get a group to think differently about a problem. One of the really powerful things, and I've started doing this quite a bit, is to actually start to draw things out. Sometimes there's a lot that you can achieve with visual communication that can be a little bit harder with just trying to talk it through. Sometimes all you really need is something for people to shoot at. You've got something in your head. Again, it's a great way to test assumptions. You've got something in your head, but if you can draw it out on a piece of paper, on your iPad, on a whiteboard, it doesn't really matter where, then you're actually sharing it with people in such a way that they can start to give you feedback. And experience design is all about feedback, because you don't design the experience, you co-design the experience with other people, and you want to have feedback at every single step of the way. So the sooner you can get something out of your head and in front of other people, the sooner you can start to get feedback. If you're worried about drawing, and you don't do a lot of drawing, there's great resources around sketchnoting. So if you look up sketchnoting online, one of the people who has written a great book about this is the person I've identified here, Mike Roda, and he basically says, if you can draw these 5 elements, circle, square, triangle, line, and a dot, then you can create anything that you want. And that's certainly true. You don't need to be an artist. This isn't about, being an artist. This isn't about art. This is about communication. And once you start doing this, just start doodling. And a great way to start is to actually, maybe listen to a TED Talk, listen to a podcast. And as you listen to it, start, drawing along and try to capture it in little sketches. As you get practice, you'll find that you can then start to do things like this, where you actually start to draw some storyboards and try to draw out the different stages that a learner would go through in a particular solution that you're trying to design for. So this one is actually for buying tickets on eBay, but you can see very easily how we can start to storyboard and write out those little user scenarios for ourselves as well if we become a little bit more confident. And you'll find that once you do that, if you can do it live in front of a group, is that the process of you drawing it and talking about it as you're drawing it out then actually elicits more feedback from the group that you're designing with. Oh, but it wouldn't work because the students would do this, that, or the other. Or if you're actually working with students, they would say, oh, that wouldn't work because I don't usually get here until whatever. So start drawing and start doodling, and get a little bit more confident about just quickly drawing things out so that it becomes a powerful tool for you to draw out some feedback from others. Okay, you can map the learner journey. This is exactly what we spoke about last year, so I won't linger too long about it, but learner journey mapping is a very popular tool in lots of different design disciplines. You'll find that journey mapping has sometimes got a little bit more of an emotional feel to it. So people will focus very much on what is the user actually feeling at this point. Sometimes you'll also see it referred to as scenario mapping, which is more about narrative. And if you're doing service design, quite often it's really about, it's called the service design blueprint. And then it's all about actually marking out the different channels that are going to be involved in delivering a particular service. But they're all very similar. This is an example of a service design blueprint or journey map, in which you can see the yellow line is actually the journey of the user, and the other two lines, the pink and the green line, are actually the front stage and the backstage end of this project, which was all about keeping graduates green. It was a program that was set up, and so there were several different stages that the user had to go to. They had to find out about the fact that this program was happening, then they had to enroll in, or then they had to find information about the program, then they had to actually enroll if they were interested, then they had to sign up, et cetera, et cetera. So it's, you know, what does the user do, and then what does the organization actually do in response to that? They don't always have to be quite that linear. Sometimes they take different shapes, and certainly if you go onto Pinterest, you'll find lots of interesting ones. In fact, we've set up a separate LX Design journey mapping board just to, you know, collect all of these beautiful journey maps that people are producing. Don't get bamboozled by the glossy design though, because a journey map doesn't have to be pretty in order to be functional. In fact, most of the value in a journey map comes from the process that you take other people through. Now, I will leave these for you to read later, because I just want to take you through the different steps that go into making a learner journey map. First, you want to map the learner path and the touch points. And by touch point, we mean every single time that the learner interacts with your organization or with a product that you've put in front of them. You then want to map the touch points of other stakeholders and channels. What does the teacher do? What does the library do? What happens in the learning management system? And at this point, you'll probably find that there are several different phases that you can start to identify. How does the student find out about the program? How does the student actually enroll in the program, etc.? Those could be different interaction phases. And then what you want to do is you want to start identifying the emotions. How do people actually feel about these different touch points? So, for instance, there could be at RMIT University here, they're doing a large customer experience journey map, you know, and one of the things, for instance, that they're identifying is that there's quite a long wait period between when people are expressing an interest for coming to study at RMIT and when they actually hear that they've been enrolled. That could be really frustrating. So what are things that we could be doing in order to keep those students engaged so that they don't lose interest? Could we put them on a newsletter so that they keep being informed about the program that they've signed up for? Could we be giving them information about RMIT? Those kinds of things. So that's why you want to identify the different touch points and see how people feel about that. Equally, there might be touch points that don't work out so well at the delivery side, right? There might be points where a teacher says, look, at this point, there's just so much admin work that I have to do that it all becomes totally overwhelming. Again, those are things that can be solved for, but doing the journey mapping and doing it in great detail can help you find all of those tiny and larger frustrations, and then you can decide which one is maybe most solvable or which one will give you the most bang for your buck if you can solve it. And that's the identify the opportunities and the barriers that should come out of the learner journey mapping process. Doesn't have to, like I said, it doesn't have to be flashy. It can just be Post-its on a wall somewhere. It'd be great if you could actually keep it up on the wall. But it can also, if you're remotely located and you're working together with people remotely, then it can also just be in an Excel sheet or a shared Google spreadsheet. Again, I've got an example here, but I'm happy for people to just take a look at that later on. We were very lucky to have a graphic designer on this project, so they did the end result was quite shiny. Number 9, we're up to number 9 already. You can create prototypes. It's very easy to create prototypes these days. In fact, all the prototype really needs to be is what is the minimum that you can rapidly create? What is the thing, again, this goes back to what can you put in front of people really quickly so that you can actually start gathering some feedback. And what you would do is you would get something out, ask people, well, I'm thinking about this, and then you get your feedback, and the next step is to create a new prototype, version 1.2 or maybe even version 2.0. Now, I'm just getting a message here. Okay, I've only got one more thing. So creating a new prototype, you can just sketch it, or you can go really low fidelity. You know, it might be something that you're actually designing for the online environment, in which case you can go really low fidelity and just do it in wireframes. But it might also just be, you know, some thoughts that you have, something that you can just put in front of people. And remember, don't just go in front of your SMEs, also go in front of your learners. But if you want to go high fidelity, there are a lot of tools out there. InVision is one. Balsamic Mockups is another one that will actually let you have these elements created already there, and then you can just drag and drop them so that you can create them with higher fidelity and with things that you find stakeholders get hung up on the look of it rather than the function of it. I think they can, which is one of the reasons that you might want to actually stick with low fidelity, so that you're really talking more about the elements rather than exactly where this button is going to be positioned. Yeah, I agree. And then the final thing that I really want to do, and that's something that we don't often get asked to do, but I think that we should start to kind of insert ourselves in this, is to design across the gaps. Because I think if you look at the different contexts that go in and the different spaces that go into making up a learner experience, you've got the course site, you've got support services, you've got the student's own personal learning network, what happens in the lectures, what happens in tutorials. I can honestly say that in the time that I was at EIT, for instance, the times that I actually sat in on a class or the times that I actually went to a tutorial, that it would be rare. It would be maybe a few times a year, you know, hardly ever. And when in fact, you know, I was being asked to help people design either a blended course or an online version of that same course, you need to know what's happening in the other spaces, right? So I think really important is that we start to consider all of the spaces and activities. And when we get asked to be the designer on something, really consider ourselves as the facilitator for the design process. And don't just limit yourself to developing for the LMS or for the course site, but actually try to design across the gaps that exist between all of those different spaces so that we can create a more cohesive learner experience. Okay, so with that, all of the slides are online. You can follow us in all of these different spaces. Like I said, what I've found so far is that experience design is highly contagious. I caught it about 2 years ago, and since then, more people have caught it. So we're very keen to connect with people and to keep talking about it. It is by no means a design science that is already set in stone. It's something that actually requires all of us to be participating in it. So Miranda asks, how much time does a process like this take? Thanks, Casper. That's nice. How much time does a process like this take? It can take a long time, but it also depends. But I think it can take a long time if you actually go through all of those processes and through all of those methodologies. But I think that what we might end up doing initially is actually do it by stealth, right? So the next time that you get asked to sit in on an initial meeting with a lecturer, you might just take a user interview approach for it. You might not have the freedom or the authority to actually go through the whole process. You know, you probably can't step away from your institutional process, but you can decide to use different techniques in the moment and for the tiny bits that you do have control over. So I think that's where, you know, you can kind of pick a mix and start using these things. And actually start talking to your team about it as well, because I think if we can prove that these methods work and that they can work well and that they can lead to better outcomes, we might get more buy-in for this type of approach. Any other questions?
Well, just while we're giving folks a chance to think about what questions they might have for you, because we know silence is valuable there, Joyce. Thank you very much for a fantastic presentation, and I really appreciate your insights across learner design. I think it's a fantastic field that's emerging. I look forward to going through your slides in more detail later on. Again, the SlideShare link is further up in the chat and also available over on Twitter. I believe you'll make it available through the course if it's not already there, Joyce, because you're usually fantastic with that.
I still need to upload it, but yes, I will.
So thank you very much for your time and for sharing your ideas with us today. It was a fantastic presentation.
Thank you, Lindy. Happy to take some more questions if people have them, or otherwise you can also just ping me on Twitter. Ooh. All right. If there are no, oh yes, Jeff's using it in the US. Jess, J, not. Hey, Vinny, thank you. I need an excuse to come your way soon. It's too cold here in Melbourne, Vinny. So Jess is JL Not on Twitter, and she is working. She works at their at what they've called the Innovation Hub, and they're using all of this. I think in other presentations, I've actually talked about how she's kind of changed the way that her team works, because they've now got a really big space with a big long table in the middle, lots of empty walls and pin boards, etc., around them, explicitly to run these types of sessions. And it almost feels more like a writer's room. You know, when you think about TV and like the people who wrote Breaking Bad or the people who write, you know, Scandal, you know, they've all got the writers in the room together and they're constantly like iterating on their processes and writing in different ways. I think that's something that they're starting to find out works really well for them. It's actually getting everyone in the room together and hacking things out that way. It's interesting because it's a very different model from what we usually do, which is where we have tiny little meetings and then everybody goes their separate ways until like maybe a week later you have a tiny little meeting again. And it might be more efficient that way as well on everyone's time. You're welcome, Natalie. A little bit sad to see that most people are only in the room with just without their microphone. I'm just like, I'd love to hear all your voices, have an actual conversation. All right, I'll let everybody.
Suggest you swing on by the Oranges Cafe, because I think everyone should and hopefully will have their microphones turned on in there to have a chat with everyone else, which is where we're heading next for the next session.
Yeah, I'm going to let everybody go and get in there, and I may have some meetings this afternoon, but I'm hoping to catch a few more sessions as the iMoot goes on. So go, agents of change.
See you soon, Joyce.
Bye.